as a G20 Sherpa, you got the holistic picture. So we'd like you to describe the state of the world as you see it now with this new view, and then within that, the state of India, the situation of India. Opening question. Second, that, we have been saying, all of us who are involved in the industry, we've been saying since the 1990s that this century, the 21st century, is the century of the mind. And who better to lay a claim on leadership than that nation in the world which has done more, understand the mind better than anybody else without a question. So given this special inheritance that India has, after you tell us state of the world, state of India, this aspect, the century of the mind and India being the leader in the century of the mind, what does that represent? Because all of us are involved in building organizations, using technology, is stuff of the mind. So these are the first two questions. If you could start with this, seeing top down.
So thanks. First, a great pleasure to be here. I've known you for a very long while, so I had to come on once you had asked me to. And I'm delighted that we are in the midst of some very bright and brilliant people here. So when India took over the presidency of G20, we were confronted with the post-COVID era. And actually, that was a time when the world was confronted with several challenges. 200 million people had gone below the poverty line. 100 million people had lost their jobs. There was a slowdown of global growth. 75 countries of the world are actually facing a severe debt crisis. And the United Nations has actually become totally non-functional because it was never envisaged in the world that in the post-World War II period, the Bretton Woods period, when many of these multilateral institutions were constituted, that one of the members of the Security Council will be at war, and therefore the Security Council will be frozen. And therefore the United Nations has not been able to arrive at any conclusion on any of the key issues confronting the world today. And the premier body today is the G20. Now G20 is important because it comprises of almost about 80% of the global GDP. It comprises of about almost 78% of the global trade. It comprises 2/3 of the global population. But more important than that is the fact that it comprises of G7 countries. It comprises of emerging markets. It comprises of Russia and China. But multilateralism works on a very simple principle. And that principle is that your ability to bring consensus across all countries. If you are not able to bring consensus, then that issue is not agreed to by the entire world. But if a consensus is arrived at, means that all these countries have agreed, and therefore other multilateral institutions like the UN, the World Bank, IMF can then proceed ahead with the action decided upon by G20. So India had a huge challenge when we took over the presidency. The Prime Minister wanted India's presidency to be very ambitious. He wanted it to be very inclusive. He wanted it to be very decisive and action-oriented. But the global challenges were very, very different. And therefore, for us, it was very clear that we should be able to bring everybody around to many issues. And the key issues confronting the world then were to accelerate the pace of global growth, because G20 is essentially a body which was constituted to drive economic growth globally. So bringing balanced, sustainable, inclusive global growth was critical. Accelerating the pace of sustainable development goals was very critical, on which we came out with a 7-year action plan. Arriving at issues of climate action and climate finance, and therefore We worked towards a Green Development Pact for the leaders, which was very important. And because both SDGs and Green Development Pact requires large scale of resources to flow into emerging markets in the global south, and therefore you had to work towards the reform of the multilateral financial institutions, which we worked out and arrived at a consensus on how they will be reformed. And then the digital public infrastructure, because in the midst of all these crises which you had, whether you've had the COVID, whether you've had a slowdown of growth, there's been one silver lining. And that silver lining has been the emergence of digital public infrastructure and our ability to, in an open and transparent manner, put money and resources in the hands of the poor. And therefore, accepting the principle of digital public infrastructure and the framework was important. And lastly, the Prime Minister was very clear that he wanted women-led development to be a key agenda of the G20, which we worked towards. There were very many challenges, let me tell you. There was a challenge on climate action. There was a challenge on energy transition. There was a challenge on even the acceptance of the word women-led development by several countries, because the United Nations terminology is gender equality, not women-led development. So there was a huge challenge. And of course, there was a massive challenge on bringing everybody around to the issue of Russia-Ukraine crisis. One paragraph took us 300 hours. It took us about 250 rounds of bilateral meetings. We failed on 16 drafts. And it was only in the 17th draft that we worked out right on the eve when the leaders were to come. There was a lot of risk we took. Did a lot of brinkmanship, but we finally arrived at an agreement on the Russia-Ukraine paragraph on which United Nations has not been able to arrive at. And finally, all the 83 paras of the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration, we had a consensus across all issues, which only India could have achieved. India therefore demonstrated its great ability to straddle the world of G7, all the developed countries. It was able to work with all emerging markets, and it worked with Russia and China, everyone, to arrive at this. But largely, why India was able to achieve consensus and achieve this success was because it worked very closely with the emerging markets. It worked with the global south, and India partnered South Africa, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Saudi Arabia. All of them spoke the voice of India. And when you had about 9 countries working together on all these key critical issues, G7 also realized that you cannot isolate all emerging markets, and therefore they worked along with us. And that was largely the reason. And why I'm saying this is because India worked on a broad philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that we may have political differences, we may have different political ideologies, but the world today, we all come from one cosmos. All of us come from one cosmos. And therefore, there has to be a human-centric approach. That was India's broad philosophy. That was the India's mindset, that we have to have a human-centric approach to global development. And we must arrive at consensus on issues. Multilateralism cannot be allowed to fail. And India demonstrated that only India could bring consensus and bring multilateralism back center stage to the global diplomacy.
So clearly an Indian idea and the Indian mind looking at holistic nature or seamlessness or whatever we may call it, that idea worked very well. Now, when you were in that vantage point, so one is a question of pushes and pulls. And you were looking at how things will pan out in the next 5-10 years. Given all these challenges and all the opportunities, was there a view you were building of India in the near term? What it means for us in the next 5-10 years?
No, so the biggest challenge was to actually get everybody to agree to several issues, because 16 ministerials had failed. Every single ministerial of India had failed. And it was fine.
How does the ministerial work?
So the ministerials actually work on different subjects. So you have a ministerial on energy transition, which is chaired finally by the Energy Minister of India. There's a ministerial on climate, which is chaired by the Climate Minister. There's a ministerial on developmental issues. So you have many ministerials, but all of them had failed because of our inability, or the global inability, to arrive at a consensus on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Climate had failed because there was no consensus on climate, on the extent of ambition of the climate. And there was some very tough stance which was being taken by Saudi Arabia and many other countries. And Saudi Arabia was being backed by China and Russia. And there was the issue with energy. So the Sherpa's job, and Sherpas represent the leaders of the country. Sherpa's job is really to take the leader on top of the Mount Everest. And when you say top of the Mount Everest, we are basically saying that he must be able to achieve success by arriving at a consensus on all these key issues. So my challenge was to ensure that we are able to break through all these ministerials and finally at the leaders level arrive at a consensus. And therefore I took all the Sherpas, took them out of Delhi. I took them 75 kilometers away from Delhi to ITC Classic in New district of Delhi. I closed them up. No, we did not allow any external journalists to come in because any leakage of information would have been very difficult. And when we were negotiating the Russia-Ukraine paragraph, we had 20 screens around because every word, every letter is argued on. There's a huge round table around which screens are kept. And we did not allow anyone, and these Sherpas are of a very high level. They are either the national security advisors or cabinet ministers. We did not allow any mobile to come in. And we negotiated very ruthlessly, very brutally, and eventually every single draft was failing. But our ability was to come out with a new draft within half an hour of the one draft having failed. We never gave up. We never said that there will be failure. We were failing, but we were coming out with more and more creative drafts every time. So we kept coming out with new drafts. On the side, we kept having bilateral meetings because I realized that in these kind of forums, it's very important that you build up personal equations. And we kept having bilateral meetings. And within G7, there were differences of opinion. France had a different perception on nuclear issue from Japan, for instance. But we kept having bilaterals. And eventually, on the 17th round, I brought them back to Delhi at the Sushma Swaraj Bhavan, and I took the discussion to 12 in the night. And at 12 o'clock in the night, after I'd done about 20 rounds of negotiation on that one particular day, I finally said, this is the final draft. I knew everybody's position, everybody's red line by that time. And I said, this is the final draft. You either take it or lump it. And I said that if you don't agree, if any country doesn't agree, then let the leader of that particular country go and talk to the Prime Minister. But I gave them just 3 hours. By end of it at 12, by 3:30, I had consent from France, Germany, Italy, everybody. And the emerging markets were all with us. But Russia came back to me and they said they wanted a line on sanction. And I said that is not possible because that was a red line for USA. So I went and talked to Lavrov and to the Russian delegation, and they had a minister called Pankin, and we discussed with him. And we had to finally tell him that if you don't agree, we'll make it 19-1. But the other thing that we told him was that if you don't agree, G7 was insisting that Zelensky speaks. And we had not agreed to that. So I tell the Russian side that if you don't agree, we'll get Zelensky to speak right after our Prime Minister spoken. And Indonesia had spoken for 25 minutes. And within 15 minutes of that, we got Russia's consent to that draft. So there was a lot of brinkmanship, there was a lot of threat, but we still did not have, all G7 had agreed except USA. So I phoned up the US Sherpa in the morning and I asked him, Mike, what's your view on this now, finally? So he said, no, Amitabh, I'll get back to you in 15 minutes because I have to discuss with President Biden. Then he got back to me in about 15 minutes. He says, no, we are fine with this except 2 issues. So I said, what are the two issues? He said, one word I want to be changed, and that word was critical. And the second thing he said is that we want first China and Russia to agree. Now, Russia's agreement we had taken the previous night, but China's agreement we didn't have. Now, then I got back to the Chinese Sherpa in the morning, and the leaders had already were coming into the hall because the meeting was to start at 9 o'clock, and this was all happening at 8 o'clock, 8:15. So the Chinese Sherpa told me that, we have no problem with the draft on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. We'll agree because it's a draft of the emerging markets. We can't oppose that draft. But we have a problem with one issue, and that is something which they had already agreed upon. But he said that my Prime Minister who has come doesn't want this there. So I said, what is it? He said, we don't want United States to hold the G20 in 2026. You remove that para, for which they had already agreed. So I got back to the Americans, and the Americans said, no, that para can't be removed because it's a critical issue for Biden's election. So the meeting started. In the neighboring room, I took the Chinese Sherpa and the American Sherpa and negotiated with them for 2.5 hours. The Chinese wanted a written guarantee they said that the Chinese said Americans don't issue us visas. Even they don't issue visas to the governor of Hong Kong. So finally, I had to negotiate for 2.5 hours. Instead of the word guarantee, I said they will ensure that visas are issued. We clinched that issue at 12:30, and I made the Prime Minister announce at 1 o'clock that everybody's consent has been arrived at, and that's how we clinched it. So there was a lot of ups and downs. There was a lot of risks. There were a lot of last-minute negotiations, very, very ruthless, tough negotiations. And that's why I said that 1 year of G20 Sherpa was like 6 years compressed into one. It was really demonstrated India's great ability to negotiate with China, America, US, everyone, Russia, everyone together, but take them to the ultimate level of brinkmanship.
So this is phenomenal, and I think these stories can go on for the rest of the day. But we'll move from there to, therefore, your perspective. When you were in the middle of all this action, quite clearly there were substantive issues which would be linked to development. So we want to focus on 3 of those issues so that it's in line with what we've been talking about. The whole theme has been talent, not over, but talent precedes technology in a sense. But I want to bring in one element which you played a very important role, and we played, and which is crucial, which is sustainability. So when we opened this session with Mr. Kamath, we talked about talent, technology, and leadership. That was the aspect we were looking at. But here I want you to bring a focus on the overarching impact of sustainability as an idea and the need to have it as an understructure in everything we do. So we want to talk of these. So if you can first give us some views of this whole area of sustainability, how was it viewed, how was it central, and therefore how does it touch the lives of normal people, because it's an abstract idea. And then we will perhaps go from there to how you saw the role of technology, people talking about it, giving technology, not giving technology, the whole technology issue, and then eventually on talent. So first on sustainability.
So first of all, let us be clear that out of the total carbon space available in the world, that is 2,800 gigatons, 2,400 gigatons has already been occupied by the developed world when they were industrializing and when they were manufacturing. So about almost 80 to 82% of the carbon space has already been occupied by the developed world. Now, India's consumption of the carbon space in the world has only been 1.3%. Logically, on a per capita income basis, it should be entitled to 17.5% of the carbon space. But irrespective of that, and India on a per capita consumption basis actually consumes 1/10 of what the United States of America does. But irrespective of that, it's important to understand that, India will become the 3rd biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emission as it urbanizes and as it industrializes now. And therefore, but to my mind, it's more important that it will be impossible for India to grow and expand as a major country driving global growth without going digital and without going green. And it's important that India goes green. So I've been a long-term believer that there's a massive disruption taking place in the world, and that disruption is towards going green. And this disruption you can see in several areas, one of which is the fact that we are climatically blessed, and therefore we've been able to do several unique things. We've been able to bring out, which many people do not realize, a very unique package of relationship between the center, the state, and the Reserve Bank of India to drive private sector investment in renewables. So that if a private company which establishes renewable is not paid by the state discoms, many of them are financially not healthy. If they do not pay, that resources will be deducted from the flow of central government's resources to the state by the Reserve Bank of India. So that's the financial structure. The other thing which people do not realize, that India is probably the only country in the world which has a one grid across the country. So if you do renewables in south, you are able to supply that in the eastern part of India or the northern part of India because of the one grid. Europe doesn't have one grid. United States doesn't have one grid. Many of us do not realize this, but it's the biggest asset which India has. And therefore, India has been able to do largely through private sector. That's important to understand. Through the private sector play, by attracting foreign capital at very low cost, and has been able to do 187 gigawatt of renewables in this country. And it has been able to bring down the cost of renewable from 22 rupees to almost close to 2 rupees. It had come down to as low as 199, and it's now gone up to about 220, 230, but it's still very low as compared to the world. Now, India is climatically blessed. No other country is blessed like India is as compared to, the only other country which has similar climatic condition is Saudi Arabia. But Saudi Arabia is full of fossil fuel. Now, the challenge is you can keep doing renewables, but electricity is only 20% of your energy. The balance 80% of your energy is what you consume in cement, in steel, in refinery, in fertilizer, in long distance transport. And that is what we import. We import about 180 billion worth of fossil fuel for these sectors. And in addition to that, we use a lot of our coal. So the challenge for India is to decarbonize what is known as the hard-to-abate sectors. And that is really the key. How do you decarbonize 80% of your energy that is hard-to-abate sectors? And what the Prime Minister has said is that instead of being an importer of energy, we should be an exporter of energy by the time we become 12047. That means instead of importing 180 billion, we should actually be an exporter of clean energy to the world. Now, no other country has this possibility of doing it other than India. And the only way to do it, according to me, is to use renewable to crack water through process of electrolyzer and produce green hydrogen. Now, green hydrogen today costs about $4.50 per kilogram. The challenge for India is to bring it down to $1 per kilogram and export it, and actually export it in its liquid form, ammonia. And that is what many companies, the big companies of India today, whether you look at Adani, whether you look at Ambani, whether you look at Greenco, whether you look at Renew or Acme, all of them are working towards is to make the climatic conditions of India work to become a leading exporter of clean energy, and that is through green hydrogen. And that is the challenge which India has. If India is able to do this, it will be the biggest transformation India will bring to the world. That is, become the biggest manufacturer. Now, what happens in India is that we lose out on the sunrise areas of growth. If you look at India's last 3-4 decades, we keep getting into traditional areas of growth, which we say these are job-creating areas, but actually the value will never come in those sectors. So the important thing is to get into cutting-edge areas of growth which will create value, and therefore never lose out on these cutting-edge areas of growth. And my belief is that if you are not able to get into green hydrogen, or if you are not able to get into electric vehicle manufacturing, for instance, because the world is going through a disruption. Every single vehicle in the next 10 years will be electric, whether we like it or not. And therefore, India is today a manufacturer, the biggest manufacturer of three-wheeler, second biggest manufacturer of two-wheeler, the third biggest manufacturer of buses, and the fourth biggest manufacturer of four-wheelers. But all this will go waste if we are not able to transition to electric vehicles very quickly and very fast. And we are not able to understand that electric automobiles are going to run on batteries, and therefore India needs to become a champion of battery manufacturing. India needs to become a champion of pump hydro, which will enable you to produce green hydrogen at lower cost. And all these are cutting edge areas of growth. So the production linked incentive, when I was in NITI Aayog, we drafted for these sunrise areas of growth, so that we are able to, and look at the result it has given. By bringing in Apple, one company today, it has created 101 country. One company in 2.5 years has created 150,000 jobs. 150,000 jobs by doing 14% of its production of iPhones from India. Its target is to take it up in the next 2 years to about 35%. So imagine it will be creating about 500,000 jobs in India, one company. And that is what you need. These emerging areas of growth will create you all the jobs, not the sunset areas of growth.
So, of course, we have to translate these bigger ideas of sustainability into a daily job. Each one of us has to do it. Any thoughts on that at an individual level, at a company level? How would some of these translate into things to do to improve the situation of sustainability?
No, so the government has done many, many things. It's opened up space policy, it's opened up the drone policy, many areas. I just met this, it's opened up the solar rooftop policy, which will allow you to do solar rooftop at household level. Now, all this will require local level of entrepreneurship. I just met this drone Didi who's driving drones for agriculture purposes. She's earning close to about 4,500 to 5,000 rupees a day through drone technology for farmers. And the intention is to have about 30,000 of these drone Didis across India's agriculture. Now, there are many, many areas. I came across this Monarch tractor which runs on EV electric battery. I mean, the battery can then become a substation for that entire village, and actually ensure that the battery of the tractor is then used to pump all today we are using fossil fuel to take out water for agriculture purposes. It can all be solar energy which can be used through this battery of the tractor itself. So there are vast areas of disruption which are waiting to happen in all these cutting edge areas of growth. Or look at two-wheelers. You're moving from 200 parts to 20 parts now, and you have to champion each one of them. You have to do local manufacturing in each one of these areas of powertrains, etc. You have to do the similar thing with drones. You have to do a similar thing with robotics. Each one of these areas offer you immense opportunity to India. And my view on that is, while there are massive opportunities, there's lack of adequate trained manpower. So when I talk to many of the startups, there's a huge challenge of product developers. India needs 1 million more product developers. I mean, you have IITs, you have IIMs, you have triple IITs, you have vast number of engineering colleges. They are producing all engineers, but only 42% of the engineers being produced today in India are actually employable. 58% of the engineers are not employable in India. So why do you have 1 million plus product developers shortage in India for our startup movement? Because our engineering colleges are not able to produce product developers for them. Where there's a massive shortage of data scientists, there's a massive shortage of machine learners, there's a massive shortage of prompt engineers. There's a huge vacuum in all these areas.
Sure. So I think we'll come to that point, but we move from sustainability, and you've talked a lot about technologies for sustainability. So in these conversations, how was the area of technology discussed? Were there issues around technology, technology transfer, creation of technology, which came up? And I just want to also touch upon the fact that when was it that we talked about manufacturing? I think during NITI Aayog, the Germany event where we positioned. So just touch upon manufacturing, technology together to see what did you perceive and view in this period as the journey that India needs to make or is making.
So manufacturing is critical for India because, some people say that India can grow on the back of services. To my mind, it's not possible. India needs to fire on all its cylinders. India needs to grow as a services nation, but India needs to do manufacturing largely because we are the only country in the world where 40% of your young youth is employed in agriculture. If 40% of your youth is employed in agriculture, they are in very poorly paid jobs. You need to take them out of agriculture and put them into manufacturing. But India also needs to do good, sound urbanization. India needs to do much higher level of agriculture productivity. Our productivity levels in value addition, in horticulture, in floriculture, in dairy, that needs to rise. But let me touch upon manufacturing. That it'll be very difficult for India to grow manufacturing at very high rates without many large companies, because manufacturing grows to global size and scale. And global size and scale will enable you to then penetrate global markets. You can't do manufacturing for India's domestic market alone. Your vision must be that we are going to penetrate global markets. And India in the past has grown at 9 to 10% for a very short period of 4 to 5 years. But whenever it has grown on the back of exports. So India's ambition has to be that we are going to be a global manufacturer, not a domestic manufacturer. And that would mean that you need not just Adani and Ambani, you need 10,000 more large companies, because large companies then create the ecosystem for tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 manufacturers. There's a backward forward linkages between MSME, small companies and large companies, and that's what needs to be done to my mind. Secondly, I think it's important that many of these companies look at cutting edge technologies areas, many other newer areas of growth, some of which I've talked about, because there's a huge opportunity in the world to accelerate the pace. The world is looking at alternatives to China, and therefore going digital and going green will be very critical. Europe will put in border taxes in 2026, so if you're not able to produce in a green manner, in a sustainable manner, it'll be very difficult to export. So I'm a great believer in manufacturing.
Finally, we come to the key issue, which is talent.
You asked me a second part to that question.
That one was the technology. So I thought if you even touch on the democratization that is happening.
Okay, so this other thing that you asked me was about when was technology discussed. So G20 discussed this at great length, technology transformation and the digital public infrastructure. And that was necessary because if you look at the world in the last 2 decades, all innovations in the world have come out of big tech. They've come out of Google, Microsoft, they've come out of Amazon, and they've come out of Meta in the western part of the world. In China, they've come out of Tencent and Alibaba. But to my mind, the biggest innovation that has happened in recent times has been what India has done through the emergence of digital public infrastructure. And what India demonstrated is that it could provide identity to 1.4 billion people. It could actually, between 2015 and 2017, it could open 550 million bank accounts. It could link the digital identity and the mobile number with the bank accounts. And it demonstrated that you could actually, today India does 46% of the real-time fast payments in the world. Last year, we did 128 billion transactions, real time, on the mobile, on the go. Every transaction just takes only 30 seconds. So 46% of the real-time transactions were done by India. China was next with just about 22 billion transactions. That was the difference between China and India. But what India demonstrated was that as a consequence of these real-time fast payments and the digital identity, and that was the public interest layer India created, and on top of which it allowed private sector to innovate. So PhonePe competes with Google Pay, Amazon competes, and all the public layer, there are 40 different apps which are competing. But what it demonstrated was that you could do open source, open API, you could do globally interoperable, build globally interoperable model where the data of the customer is not the ownership owned by either Meta or by Google. And here the data is owned by the citizen who gives, actually through a techno-economic process, he gives consent for the use of the data. And therefore, this model of being open source, open API, globally interoperable, and accepting digital public infrastructure was the biggest challenge confronting G20. Because what India had also demonstrated was that as a consequence of this model, you could provide, on the payment history, you can provide, I mean, there are a number of young startups like MobiQuick, Pine Lab, which do credit. And then you have a number of young startups like Zerodha, Grow Up Stock, which have taken stock market from urban areas to tier 2, tier 3 cities and rural areas. And they control about 30% of the stock market now. And they're creating wealth for rural areas and tier 2, tier 3 cities. And then you have a number of insurance companies like Go Digit, Acco, who give you insurance in 1 minute. I mean, when I was a young officer, insurance with LIC used to take me 6 months, 7 months of paperwork. They provide on the go, on the mobile, in 1 minute. So from a transaction takes 30 seconds, credit takes 1 minute, stock market transaction takes 30 seconds. But what India demonstrated is that the cost of acquisition of a customer in India had fallen from about $100 to less than $1. Whereas in the United States, the paperwork still takes about $100. And secondly, what India demonstrated to the rest of the world was that you could create many DPI like Diksha Swayam in education, you could create a DigiLocker, you could create fast tags, many things, and that the way forward is through digital public infrastructure. Now that definition of digital public infrastructure, the framework for digital public infrastructure has now been accepted by G20 during our presidency, and that will take it forward. So that is the way the world will evolve. And to my mind, that is the way open source will be the way forward for the rest of the world.
So finally on talent. So all of this has happened. So obviously there is talent, but we have criticism about its inadequacy or not doing enough or whatever. And here, of course, everybody's involved with that for their companies. So first a macro view, and then your observation. And I'm again going back to your experience since this was happening and you were interacting with people. How is the talent issue surfacing? How is it being addressed? And was it one of the points of discussion? And then, of course, your own views on what to do with it.
So first of all, my experience is based on what the Prime Minister asked me to do when I was CEO NITI Aayog. He said, let's use this period to develop some technologies at population scale, at low cost, by which we can create a model for the world. And I worked in several areas. And I worked with several startups with the private sector so that they could build up. And I had several rounds of meeting with them. And several products came out of that, and one of which is the Unified Logistic Interface program, which is being implemented by DPIIT. And we've also worked on a model of open university education system through OpenTech. But the challenge which came out which all these startups came up with, was that there are engineers available, but there are no employable engineers available in India for the kind of job we need to do. and there are no good product developers available in India. So then I looked at it and I realized that actually, can any one of you guess how many engineers Google employs today? Anyone? Any guess? Google employs close to about 33,000 engineers, but they're all product developers. All product developers. They're all developing constantly new products for new innovation. Now, India today lacks that. India's IITs, triple IITs are not able to produce product developers. If you're not able to meet the requirement of your startup movement, which is growing and expanding in such a big way, then there is something severely wrong with our education system. That's what I feel, that you are producing engineers who are not employable. And the latest job skill report shows that only 42% of our engineers are employable. So you need to create, skill them, upskill them for new jobs. And one of which this startup called Scalar does. It does training for cloud security, for product development, for AI, for data scientists, for machine learners. And the salary for that particular engineer goes up 4 times through a 6 months course. He becomes far more employable. So, to my mind, we need to do that on a very, very large scale. Work with IITs, triple IITs. We need to work with the private sector. I mean, I know many private sector which actually hire people only through particular institutes with which they work. Baba Kalyani, for instance, works with IIT Mumbai, and they train his people for his kind of jobs which he's doing. So I think we need to really now bring that industry interface to create skilled manpower for the requirement of that particular industry, which is very critical now. Without that, India will find it impossible to grow. Not only India, to my mind, if by 2047, India is going to produce 31% of the skilled manpower for the world. If we are not able to provide that skilled manpower for the world, India will not be able to grow. So look at this. When I was a young officer in Kerala, I was secretary in tourism, and that time, all the hospitality managers, all the hotels of the world used to be managed by Four Seasons, Ritz-Carlton, all the top hotels. In fact, including Taj, brought in Gora general managers because they were trained at Lausanne in Switzerland. Now, today you go across the world, all the Ritz-Carlton and Four Seasons are managed by Indian general managers. They're coming out of our Indian Institute of Hospitality Management because Indians are traveling abroad. Much like in the 60s, the Japanese were traveling with a flag in front, and the Koreans were traveling in 70s, and 2000, the Chinese were traveling. In 2020, all Indians will be traveling abroad. So you need to produce hospitality managers for the world. Similarly, we need to produce IT engineers for the world. We need to produce product developers. We need to produce prompt engineers. We need to produce AI engineers. We need to produce data scientists for the world. Only India can do that. I mean, we are ordering. I was talking to this Airbus CEO. We are the only country which has ordered 1,500 Airbuses to France. And I asked him, what are the chances you'll be able to supply on time? He said, the biggest challenge we have is we don't have skilled manpower like India has.
You'll be very glad to know that for the Airbus plant, is it 400 engineers, Vijay? The first lot? NIIT has got a project to make them day one ready. So we are sitting there trying to do these things for everybody, and so also for many people here. So finally, few minutes for questions. I know there'll be many, but just a few minutes. So 1 and then 2 if the mic can go there and then there. And the second mic can go there at the back.
Good morning, sir. I am Srikant from Hyderabad, and kudos to the entire Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his team, and to you, and to Dr. Jaishankar as well, for making the word look becoming famous. And my question is, as we are from L&D fraternity, so as part of negotiation skills, how much do you think the negotiation fatigue has helped you in cracking the mutual consensus with the other countries as well?
No, there was no fatigue. There was a lot of aggression till the end. So you had to be.
Fatigue of the others, he said.
No, I know, but you had to be. See, in multilateral negotiations, you have to be more knowledgeable than them. That means you have to do a lot of hard work to say what kind of positions they have taken in the past in different multilateral organizations. You have to know more than them. That means you have to study, work very hard in terms of knowledge. Your ability, so to my mind, knowledge content is very important. Secondly, you have to build a very good team around you, which I was able to do. Thirdly, you have to take a lot of risks. Without risk taking, you also have to be very aggressive at times and very soft at times. So you have to have great negotiating skills in terms of your ability to blow hot and cold at different times, and actually antagonize at one time, but go and be at a personal level, be friendly. And fourthly, your ability to build personal relationship bilaterally is very, very important. So it's many things come into play in multilateral negotiations.
Yeah, there's a question there at the back.
Good morning, Mr. Kant. This is Amitabh. Just two short questions. How is Bharat going to get benefited from our success in G20? And we are talking about exporting green energy. By when we think this can be achieved?
So I think how Bharat will benefit from G20.
The success we have.
Yeah. So one, across the world, wherever you go, if you go to the United Nations, they say that you've done our work in terms of sustainable development goals. That's important. So their feeling is that what we were trying to do, we weren't able to do, you've been able to do. If you look at COP28, for instance, the agenda for that entirely was driven by India. Tripling of renewable energy, doubling of energy efficiency. We'd finished half their work. They didn't even have to negotiate. Many of the key agendas were driven by us. If you look at, for instance, IMF and World Bank, their reform agenda was laid out by the Indian presidency during the course of its 1 year through this Larry Summers and N.K. Singh report which came out. So now they are in the process of implementing that. These are far-reaching reforms for the world. I mean, the reforms of the IMF and World Bank has not been talked about ever after the Bretton Woods period. This is the first time that we push for it. And similarly, the acceptance of digital public infrastructure was a very, very big thing for India. And also the fact that we were able to position, women-led development politically was very, very important for us. So many key achievables which will help us. And your second question?
By when this will be?
Yeah, so that's a function of our ability. That's a function of our ability to bring down the cost of green hydrogen, as I had said. We are climatically blessed. We have the ability to produce renewables. We should be able to produce renewables at low cost, then manufacture electrolyzers, and then produce green hydrogen at low cost, bring it down to $1. If you are able to do that, the cost of producing it in India is $4.5. The cost of producing it in the United States is $7.5 simply because of climatic conditions. So United States will have to subsidize it by $3, not India. So you have to bring size and scale of manufacturing and bring the cost down.
Okay. One and then two, and then we have to wind up because we're out of time, and then Mr. Kant has to take a flight as well.
This is Piyush from Deloitte. Sir, I come from cybersecurity fraternity, so I want to take your views. Is cybersecurity an agenda in G20 because of the large digital infrastructure and digital public infrastructure and digital advancement which is happening in India? We are actually opening up a lot of attack surfaces, and since the bottom of the pyramid people might get impacted because of a lot of cyber attacks happening. What are your views around cybersecurity?
No, cybersecurity will be a very critical issue. It will be the biggest leader's declaration. It had a passing reference, but separately, the Home Ministry, the Ministry of Information Technology, and the National Security NSA's office all had worked together and held a separate cybersecurity conference on the sidelines of G20. And cybersecurity, to my mind, will be a very, very critical issue as digital financial inclusion, digitization, AI, all this rapidly enhances, cybersecurity will be one of the key challenges before the global community, particularly in India.
Last question.
Yeah. Hi, Mr. Kant. This is Sanjeev. First of all, thank you for being the Sherpa and taking India towards the Everest. My question is, while we could do what we could do with G20 globally, what can we do different for the states in India, 28 plus states in India, to come together as one country?
Yeah, so that's a very important question, because to my mind, it will be very difficult for India to grow at high rates, 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, year after year, year after year, for 3 decades. So I think the real challenge now is post this elections that we produce champion states. If you do not have 10 to 12 states growing at high rates of 10% for 3 decades, it will not be possible for India to grow at high rates for a very long time. Now the challenge is that it can't be that India grows only on the back of the southern part of India or the western part of India. You need the northern states and you need the eastern part of India to grow. You need states like Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and these are all mineral-rich states of India. Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and UP has done huge transformation in the last 5 years, and therefore you need massive transformation. These are the most populous states of India. So if UP transforms, it's the if it was a country, it will be the 5th largest country in the world on population basis. And therefore, if UP transforms with infrastructure, with better learning outcomes, with better health outcomes, with better nutritional standards, the whole of India gets lifted up. And similarly, these states, these 5 states that are named, to my mind, they need to be really the champion states of India. If they grow at high rates for next 3 decades, India will automatically grow. But for that to happen, I think 3-4 things need to happen. One is, I'm a great believer that urbanization has to happen in these states. Urbanization will be a very key driver of growth. Secondly, agriculture productivity must go up in these states. And thirdly, you need a massive amount of improvement. I'm a big believer in social sectors. So I'm a big believer that without we are providing education, we're providing health, but the outcomes need to be monitored very closely, digitally on a real-time basis, as we've done in the aspirational district program. And therefore, you need to monitor very closely, radically improve health outcomes, nutritional outcomes, and provide huge skills to these people in these areas. If we are able to do this and transform these 5 or 6 states, then India's growth story will be radically different in the coming decades.
Thank you. It brings me to the last question, which is a personal question. So we believe that all of us, at least at NIIT, we are all saying that our mission is to help people realize their true potential, right? Now, what did you discover about your own potential? You said that you were at 10x the amount of load in this G20 Sherpa role, which you hadn't discovered, because to go to 10x or 5x your normal high productivity, you would have had to fall back on some extraordinary capabilities which you perhaps discovered for the first time. So is there something you discovered about your own potential which is a lesson for everyone?
Well, you know, I firstly believe that it's very important to work on outcomes. Quite often we say, I'm working hard, I'm working. We should be very clear, what do I want to achieve? That this is my target, this is my outcome. I want to achieve this outcome. Secondly, I'm a strong believer that that outcome must be delivered using real-time data. Real-time data that was not available when I was a district collector. It was not possible, you know, how you have performed as a district collector, data would come in 6 years, 7 years later. But today in India, you are able to get real-time data on a minute-to-minute basis. So when I was doing the aspirational district program, I was getting data from 115 of the most backward districts on a minute-to-minute basis. So Malkangiri collector came to me and he said, sir, I'm coming third. I'm coming third in the aspirational district program for this month, and I'm trying to come first. So I opened the dashboard in front of him, and by the time he had left Malkangiri to come to Delhi, he had slipped from being third He had gone to 6th position. That is how the data was changing on a minute-to-minute basis. So I told him that you have slipped and gone down to 6th by the time you have traveled. So, you can track data on a real-time basis. Please, the key is outcomes, data, good governance based on data. And that, to my mind, you have to have a big vision. But to my mind, outcomes, data, having a good team is very important to be able to crack all this.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think you've left many ideas, but you've also left a phenomenal amount of enthusiasm. I'm sure all of us are infected by that. So thanks so much for being with us.
Thank
Truly
you.
appreciate the fact that you could find the time.
Thanks.
We'll close this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Raji. Your request. Token of our gratitude.